Hi, welcome back to Roxy's Journal of Stitchery. Um, this week what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the layout of my piece. So I've got my neutral background, which I did in the last episode. And in this episode, I'm starting to think about what I want my block to look like and how I'm going to incorporate my fancy flowers. So I pulled a whole bunch of bits and pieces out that I think I might like to use. I have some vintage Suffolk puffs or yo-yos, which are really old ones and they're very tattered and I love them. And then I have a few little scraps of fabric and some tulle, and then I've fussy cut some pieces of fabric as well where I've cut out some flowers, and I've cut out that beautiful bird, which is a Natalie Lett designed bird. She's a French artist that I've been following for a really long time, and Anna Marie Horner has made that fabric using her design. I also have some really pretty sort of lace kind of trim, which I want to put on as well, and it does take me quite a while to figure out where I want everything to go and what I'm going to use. So I'm going to speed up this part. Well, actually it's already sped up, just so you can see me playing around with the layout. Again, no rules. The only rule I did follow is I decided that I wanted 3 Suffolk puffs because I think 3 looks better than 2 and better than 4. So as I've said before, I like the odd number look. Other than that, I just play around with it until I get it looking the way I want. So I'll come back in a little while and just explain how I stitch it all down together. So just while you're watching me play around here, it does take me quite a while to figure out what I want. And even once I do figure out what I want, just before I stitch it, I actually change it again. So it just evolves over time. I have a bit of a vision in my head. I usually come into things with a vision, otherwise it would take me forever. And then I just play around and adjust things as I go. So with my fancy flowers, you can see I've got some fussy cut flowers from fabric. So just so you know how I cut them out, I haven't put any sort of interfacing or any stabilizer on the back of the fabric. I've just cut it straight out from the fabric, and I will be stitching it down. I don't think it needs anything. The fabrics are all solid enough. If it was a super thin fabric, maybe I'd want to put something behind it, but these ones are all okay. So I have just left a little gap around the bird. When I stitch it down, I probably should have left a slightly larger gap just because the edges do fray a little bit. But my plan is that I'm going to embellish that bird quite a bit, and so you won't even notice the fraying. It won't be an issue. I'm also going to embellish the flowers and the Suffolk puffs. The plan is to turn them into flowers as well, so they'll be my fancy flowers. So almost ready to start stitching. Still deciding what I want, what colours I want to use. I don't know if you're like me, but I've been doing a lot of sort of sewing whilst watching the Winter Olympics since it started last week. I'm loving watching them. I pretty much like all the events. Winter Olympics are really good, and I've actually got 3 former students from my school who are all competing for Australia, and one that just left 2 years ago that I was pretty much in charge of for 6 years. So very excited to see him race. He's racing in 3 different cross-country skiing events, and he was a sensational snow sports kid when he was at school. So looking forward to seeing that, and loving that we are Australia. We're not really known for our snow sports. Not a lot of snow in Australia. We do have snowy mountains, but we're lucky if we get much snow on them. Sometimes we don't get a lot. It's not very high in altitude compared to many places overseas, but it's great to see that we got a gold medal the other day from one of our girls, and also a bronze on the same day, because we don't often get Winter Olympics medals. Anyway, I'm going to cut the video because I'm literally playing around with this over and over again. It's probably getting boring to watch, so I'm going to cut forward to when I start stitching it down. I'll see you again in a sec. All right, so I've just cut to where I'm going to start stitching. So I'm starting off with this old piece of tulle, which I've ripped off an old top, and I'm going to use just the plain white cotton, old cotton that I've got. And all I'm doing, just like I've done with many of my laces, I'm just doing little tiny stitches over parts of the tulle to hold it in place. Pretty much just like a running stitch. I go back and forth, I think 3 or 4 times, just to make sure it's all held down in place. I'll probably end up doing a little bit of embroidery over it so it will hold it down nicely. Okay, so my tulle's in place. Now I'm going to stitch down this strip of green fabric. This piece of green fabric just came off an old quilt. I just sort of ripped off a piece and I thought it was really pretty. So this time I'm going to use my silk thread, which is quite thin and you can't notice it very well. And I've picked, I think, the darker grey for this one, slightly darker grey, because I felt like it would blend in with the green and you won't see it too much. So again, I'm just using a small running stitch that I'm taking all the way down to the bottom of the green fabric. I'm doing small stitches on top, only maybe a couple of mils, and then a slightly larger one underneath where you won't see it, just so you can't see the stitches very well. I don't want them standing out. If I wanted them standing out, I'd do stitches maybe in a stranded cotton or a perlé cotton and in a contrasting colour just so you could notice the stitches better. I might decide to do some stitching on the green strip later, depending on how it looks. If I want it to stand out a little bit more, that's what I'll do when I decide to embellish my block. So now that I've done the running stitch down one side of the fabric, I'm just coming up and doing the same thing up the other side to hold it in place. All right, green fabric is on, and now what I'm going to do is stitch another piece of that ripped up tulle. It's from the same garment that I used before, and it's just to add some more texture to my neutral background because my neutral background is pretty plain and I just want to add a few more interesting bits and pieces. Same technique again, small running stitch, just a little stitch every now and then, running all the way along one side and then back in the opposite direction at the top. All right, so that's stitched down as well. Now I'm deciding to play around a little bit more with my layout, even though I had already decided what I wanted to do. I change it up a little bit. I've got this little piece of selvage from a French fabric. Someone who speaks French might be able to tell me what those words mean. I just like the red script on the neutral background. And then I decided to place it down the bottom, and I'm just working out how I'm going to place that lovely piece of lace on top. Okay, so time to stitch on that selvage. Whoops, sorry, that's my little kitty cat. She's coming in for a pat. So stitching on my selvage now. I'm just doing a little overcast stitch along the edge. Sorry about the wobbly camera. I think my cat Bobby, she bumped it. So just a little overcast over the edge of the selvage. I do that along the bottom, and then I end up doing a little running stitch across the top. Sorry, Bobby keeps popping in, and she's quite cute. She keeps playing with the little bits of fabric and trying to catch my string. She was sitting on my lap having a pat as I was sewing. She does go away. She's not the most affectionate cat in the world. She's affectionate on her terms. So she will be affectionate to us at certain times, particularly in the morning when she wants food. She starts nudging me for a pat. And sometimes in the evening, she likes to have a pat. And then obviously as I'm sewing, she's come in for a pat. So when she's feeling affectionate, I have to give her pats because we don't get it all the time. But anyway, sorry, little pause here. She's just popping in to say hi. All right, so I did that little overcast stitch all the way along the bottom, and now just across the top. That's the raw edge because that's where I've ripped the fabric, whereas the other side is sort of the actual edge where the fabric was finished off. So I did the overcast on the finished edge, and on this raw edge, I'm just doing a little running stitch as I go along. So back to my layout again and my lace piece. I've probably moved this lace piece all over the place because I couldn't quite decide where I wanted it, but eventually I work it out and I decide to stitch it down. So just like the way that I've showed you how I stitch down other pieces of laces, I'm just doing a little overcast stitch on different parts of the lace. I actually do quite a lot of stitching on this one because it's got a lot of detail, just to hold everything down in place. I'm using just a plain white cotton again, a piece of that antique cotton thread that I have, and it blends in quite nicely with this type of lace. You can't see it very well at all. So just finishing up sewing the last bits of that lace on. It actually did take quite a long time to sew down, so I'm not going to show you all of that. But now the whole thing is nicely stitched down and secured in place. So back to playing out with my layout because that's all I seem to be doing in this video. I've changed it up so many times, and hopefully I decide very soon what I'm going to do. So I think this is what I do end up with. I put my bird sort of in the middle there, my Suffolk puffs at the top, and then there'll be some interesting things down the bottom as well to sort of go along with our fancy flower theme. So to sew these Suffolk puffs, it is the same technique, very simple, stitching them in place using the white cotton thread, just a little overcast stitch around the edge. I'm probably about four millimeters apart with my stitches. These are old Suffolk puffs, which I had to, if you saw at the beginning, they were all connected together. They'd come from an old piece of quilt. I got them from Melanie, from Purveyor of Reclaimed Textiles. I've mentioned her several times in my videos, and I think I have tagged her name at the bottom. She sells through Instagram from Melbourne, and she often gets Suffolk puffs, and I've bought quite a lot of old vintage ones from her. And then you have to take them apart. Now these ones here, these particular ones, were really old ones. There's a lot of wear and tear on them, and they're actually really faded on the front. They look like, I don't even think that they're you can get those reprinted. I think they're 1930s or 1940s fabric. I don't even think they're reprinted ones. These might even be original because these are old. And some of the Suffolk puffs are really coming apart. But I love all that kind of weathering, that worn look. They probably were a quilt on someone's bed for a very long time. And then somehow Melanie has been able to acquire the quilt, and then she takes them apart into sections, and you buy sections. So I think I've got a few bits and pieces from this quilt where I've rebought them, because I do really particularly like these ones. They're fairly small Suffolk puffs. Often when I buy them, you get slightly larger ones, but I like these small ones, and they're very pretty sort of colours, just because they're so faded. So I end up going with the 3 on up at the top here, and yeah, I go with that purple one. The purple one's very misshapen. I could stretch it out properly so it's back into a circle shape, but I actually like that it's got a funny shape. It adds character, and not all flowers are perfectly round, so this will just turn into a odd shaped flower. Not sure what type yet. That plan is still to come. I guess you'll get to see next week when I start embellishing how these Suffolk puffs evolve. So it's finally time to stitch down my little bird. My little bird is going to slightly overlap onto that piece of lace. So same technique again. I'm just using the white cotton, doing a little overcast stitch every 3 to 4 mils around the edge until I get the whole way down around the bird to hold it into place. So the plan is, once this bird is in place, I'll be embellishing the bird with embroidery. And I just love that the bird it's got like a painted look. It is a painted look. It would have come from one of Natalie's paintings. She does a lot of quirky sort of animals, colourful animals and birds in her paintings. And I hope to paint it with the thread, with the embroidery thread next week. So I'm just about finished stitching around my bird, little overcast stitch. Can't really see the frayed bits from where you're sort of seeing, but some of the fabric has frayed a little bit, but that's okay because once I do that embroidery, you're not going to notice. So my main parts for my block have all been stitched down. It took me a little bit less than 2 hours to sort of stitch all those extra bits and pieces on. And then next week I'll come back and I'll show you how I start to embellish it, followed by another week of embellishment, and then we'll be getting close to revealing our next month's theme, which Rachel will be revealing. So I hope you enjoyed what I've done this week, and I look forward to seeing the work that everyone's doing on Facebook and on Instagram, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.